Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which I will now place in the chat room. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room or turn your microphone on to say hi. We'll be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guests are Sherry Grant, a pianist, cellist, and artistic director of the International Catherine Mansfield Centenary, Dr. Gerri Kimber, an internationally renowned Mansfield expert and the festival patron, and Dr. Martin Griffiths, a cellist and festival advisor. Sherry, welcome. Please tell us a bit about yourself and how you became acquainted with Catherine Mansfield. Sherry, can you turn your microphone on?
Yes, of course. Hi, my name is Sherry Grant. I'm a concert pianist from New Zealand, Auckland, and I also play cello. And I recently started writing poetry, and I remember that I first heard about Catherine Mansfield through the words of Xu Zhimo, a very famous Chinese poet. And he had very good things to say about her writing and her personality and everything. So it made me fascinated from back then.
Fantastic. Welcome, Gerri.
Hi.
Gerri,
Mansfield's been a part of my life for honestly as long as I can remember. I think since I was 15, when I picked up a secondhand copy in a bookstore of The Garden Party and Other Stories, read it, and was immediately hooked. And once Mansfield gets her claws into you, I'm afraid to say there's no escape. She soon becomes an addiction for which there is no known cure. I eventually wrote my PhD on her, and I've been writing about her ever since. And to date, I have written or co-edited nearly 40 books on her, which is, I think, unmatched by any other scholar. I love everything about her.
Congratulations, that's wonderful. Martin, welcome. Can you tell us, you're the musician among us. Please tell us about your connection to Catherine Mansfield.
Okay, well, I probably first heard of Catherine Mansfield when I was at school. In New Zealand, she's taught widely in education, but I only really got deeply interested when I was studying the cello. Mansfield was a cellist, and so I got involved in I was studying at university and read about her musical exploits and got interested in that.
So she was a musician too.
She played the cello, she played the guitar, the piano, she sang. She was very talented in many areas.
Wow. Okay, so let's dive right in. This is the first roundtable we're going to start. It's called Who Was Catherine Mansfield? Here's a video to start off our roundtable.
A tremendous gust of wind sprang upon the house, seized it, shook it, dropped, only to grip the more tightly. The grandmother, shaking her before the window, had seen the sea rise and green mountains, and in the galley the wild trees lashed together.
Wrote Catherine Mansfield, describing her own birth. By her own account, she had come forth squealing out of a reluctant mother in the teeth of a southerly buster. The elements, she believed, had an immense effect on birth. Born in a storm, Her life course was set. But I tell you, my Lord Fool, out of this nettle danger, we pluck this flower safety, reads the inscription on her gravestone. Catherine Mansfield, the New Zealand writer, died at Fontainebleau, France on the 9th of January, 1923. She was only 34 years old. She left behind her over 100 short stories, 60 notebooks of jottings, and thousands of personal letters. Her life story has fascinated the world. It's been said she changed the course of the English short story, and her work and life are still the subject of intense study and debate.
Okay, so now this begins our second roundtable. Who was Catherine Mansfield? According to Britannica.com, Catherine Mansfield was born in Wellington, New Zealand in 1888 and died near Paris, France in 1923 of tuberculosis. Quote, she was a New Zealand-born English master of the short story who evolved a distinctive prose style with many overtones of poetry. Her delicate stories, focused upon psychological conflicts, have an obliqueness of narration and a subtlety of observation that reveal the influence of Anton Chekhov. She, in turn, had much influence on the development of the short story as a form of literature. Gerri, is that an accurate summary? What's missing from that?
Well, it's a very brief, but accurate summary. Catherine Mansfield wasn't her real name. Her real name was Kathleen Mansfield Beecham. And as I think you saw in that little clip, she was born in Wellington, New Zealand in 1888. The third daughter of very well-to-do Harold and Annie Beecham. Her father would become chairman of the Bank of New Zealand. The family wanted for nothing. They were very well off. Her parents sent her and her two older sisters to England to be educated, which again was a real status symbol in those days. And then when she returned, aged 18, to New Zealand, she couldn't bear it. She became very, very disruptive at home. I mean, literally, she sort of wrote in one of her notebooks, I shall make myself so objectionable that they will have to send me back. And that's exactly what they did. Eventually, they just got so sick of her. They allowed her to return to London to be a writer, but she soon got herself into lots of trouble. She became pregnant to someone that she loved very much, but the father couldn't marry her. She then married a virtual stranger to safeguard, for the sake of the baby. And we're talking about 1909 at this time. And then she left him the following morning because she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. But of course, she was then married, so she did have legitimacy for the baby. Her exasperated mother, who'd heard all about this from New Zealand, caught a boat, which in those days took 6 weeks, and arrived. And she didn't know her daughter was pregnant. She thought her daughter was suffering from lesbian tendencies, because that's what her husband of 24 hours had said he thought she was suffering from, because he couldn't understand why else she would have left him. So she was transported to Bavaria to undertake a water cure, which at that time was deemed to, in inverted commas, cure homosexuality. But during that, she spent 7 or 8 months in Germany. She had an affair with a Polish emigre, which resulted in her contracting gonorrhea, which wasn't diagnosed until 1920 and caused her lots of very, very unpleasant symptoms. And also at that time, we believe she contracted the tuberculosis that would eventually kill her at the age of 34. But she used those experiences to write her first book, a collection of stories based in Germany called In a German Pension. She then, that was in 1911, in 1912, she met the man that she would eventually marry, following her divorce from her first unfortunate husband, called John Middleton Murry, a well-known critic. During the course of her life, she published 2 more collections of stories, Bliss and Other Stories, The Garden Party and Other Stories. And by the time of her death, not only was she very ill with tuberculosis, but she had more or less hit the big time as far as writing was concerned. She'd become very well known. And it's just so tragic that she died so young. In October 1922, having tried every sort of cure available for the tuberculosis, mountain cures surrounded by snow, living on the Côte d'Azur with proximity to warmth and the sea in the south of France. That didn't seem to help either. She then thought, right, I'm going to try a spiritual cure, thinking that if she could cure her spirit, her inner, her soul, then maybe her inner self, then maybe her outer self would be cured. So she entered George Gurdjieff's esoteric community in Fontainebleau, which had literally just been founded. And she moved there in October 1922. And she had a few precious weeks there before dying on the 9th of January in 1923 from a severe hemorrhage. Her husband had come out to see her. They had been estranged for quite some time. And her husband came out to see her. And I think in her excitement, maybe she ran up the stairs too quickly, hemorrhaged, and died that evening. So that's the person we're dealing with. She was feisty, charismatic, highly intelligent. She lived life to the full, who experimented with all sorts of ways of living. And of course, she paid bitterly for her mistakes later in life. But throughout, the only thing that mattered to her, her real raison d'etre, was her writing. Nothing else really mattered to her.
Wow. Okay, Gerri, Martin, I don't know if you want to jump in there.
Well, yeah, it's a great summary, Gerri. That's fantastic. To connect the person with the stories is not always vital. You know, you want to approach an artist, writer from their work, but to have the whole story of her life enhance that work, I think, is really helpful. And yeah, thanks, Gerri.
And I think music actually played a big part in her writing and her life. Yeah,
absolutely.
And Gerri, can you tell
I
us
think
about
Martin
that
could
music?
say,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so musically, yeah, I got involved reading about Mansfield because of music. So she was not only was she a good musician, but she was able to connect, I think, different art forms. So cinema, music, theatre, writing. She could see the spectrum of life and like to reflect in her writing, her awareness of other writers, of musicians, of different forms. So yeah, that's a whole nother side of her story is what innovations did she make in her writing, and it connects with the arts as well as her life, which was very peculiar and quite fraught.
Fantastic. So really an incredible intellectual life, someone who was really, really interested in the arts, in literature. This is someone who took to heart, in other words, all of these things. It wasn't just an academic interest. It was really, this was who she was. Is that right, Gerri?
Absolutely. And she had a supreme gift for storytelling. I don't actually think she always realized quite how brilliant she was. And then she would get a story right and she would say, this is what I mean, this is what I'm trying to get at. But she was always denigrating herself and saying, no, this isn't quite right. No, I know I could do better. And then you read these stories and you're like, oh my goodness, you know, this is just so perfect. But you know, she was risque and she was very, very modern. She shortened her hems as soon as she was able. She wore brightly coloured clothes, scarlet stockings. She cut her hair in a bob when other women were still only vaguely thinking about it. We're talking about the 1910s, not the 1920s. And she was very, very entertaining. In his autobiography, Leonard Woolf, the husband of Virginia Woolf, wrote that no one made him laugh more than she did. During the years when they knew her. She was a supreme storyteller, both orally and writing stories as well.
Fantastic. Let's go to those stories right now. This is the beginning of our second roundtable, which is, what are the unique qualities of Catherine Mansfield's writing? Now we're going to look at a recent movie, Bliss, the beginning of Catherine Mansfield, and we'll see that some of this, even though it's supposedly the story of her life, it's really told through, it's based on the stories that she wrote herself. Here we are.
Sit down. I am aware of your feelings, Kathleen. Believe me, there is not a single person in this house who is unaware of them. But I will not allow you to take your frustrations out upon your mother. Her health is fragile. You know it's fragile. And she is not to be agitated in any way. What?
I didn't say anything.
You looked at me, miss.
Or may I not look?
Not in that fashion. And I repeat, you must do nothing that aggravates your mother.
Well, then I am to lead a very dull life.
Would that be such a terrible thing? These ideas.
Sorry, I'm having some trouble with the movie at this time.
I didn't say anything.
You looked at me, miss.
Or may I not look?
Not in that fashion. And I repeat, you must do nothing that aggravates your mother.
Well, then I am to lead a very dull life.
Would that be such a terrible thing? These ideas.
Okay, so we're going to go on. I'm sorry, we can't see the rest of that. Anyways, it goes on, and she has how shall we say, a moment right out of another story where she has a slightly homosexual, a queer encounter with another woman. So let's continue. Now I'm going to show, this is the cover of the garden party. One second, there it is. So, oh, excuse me, I don't have this right. I'm sorry. So anyways, I will continue. To start off our roundtable about Catherine Mansfield's writing, please allow me to read a few sentences from At the Bay. Quote, "Very early morning, the sun was not yet risen, and the whole of Crescent Bay was hidden under a white sea mist. The big bush-covered hills at the back were smothered. You could not see where they ended, and the paddocks and bungalows began. The sandy road was gone, and the paddocks and bungalows on the other side of it. There were no white dunes covered with reddish grass beyond them. There was nothing to mark which was beach and where was the sea. A heavy dew had fallen. The grass was blue. Big drops hung on the bushes and just did not fall." End quote. So, Sherry, I'd like, or Gerri, let's go back to you actually. With the what the pristine introductory paragraph of At the Bay doesn't reveal is that the rest of this story will be steeped in sexual innuendo. So tell us, what are some of the unique qualities of Catherine Mansfield's writing?
Yeah, I mean, that opening paragraph to At the Bay, for me, is one of the most beautiful openings to any story or novel. It's just so and it's so modernist in its colouring. Everything is coloured. The grass was blue. I mean, how modernist is that? You know, big drops hung on the bushes, the silvery toy, and then you've got marigolds and pinks. It's just absolutely beautiful. But yeah, Mansfield, she was that rare thing, mainly because she died so young, a writer exclusively associated with the short story. And her stories are so deceptively simple that you almost think that she's writing for children. They're like children's stories, but it's not. It's just that the stories are deceptively easy to read. But the themes, as you just said, Simeon, are entirely adult in form and content. She's not a minor writer. It's just the fact that the short story is always perceived to be a lesser form than the novel. But if she'd lived to be 60, 70, 80, I'm sure she would have written novels. It's just that when you're traveling and always on the go, going from hotel to villa to another hotel, and you know, you don't really have the space, the time, the breath to sort of take stock and write anything longer. Her themes, she incorporates violence, war, death, childbirth, relationships, especially in marriage, and feminist and, as you said, sexual issues. And her stories are very, very simply presented. You just get a little slice of life, a glimpse into the lives of individuals or families, just captured at a certain moment, frozen in time, like a painting or a snapshot. And as you saw in that very first sentence of what you just read out, the first sentence about the bay is literally very early morning. It's like a stage direction. It's setting the scene. And she is really, really good at that. and she cuts straight through to the action. And she does this with a lot of her stories. The garden party, and the very famous story starts, and after all, the weather was ideal. So what isn't encompassed in that, and after all, you get the impression that the family, the Sheridan family, have been really worried about whether the weather was going to be good enough for their garden party, whether the rain was going to hold off. And then you get it straight in. And after all, the weather was ideal. Another story called A Dill Pickle. It starts, and then after 6 years, she saw him again. So you've got a whole backstory there, because in a short story, you haven't got time to fill in the backstory. It's what's important is almost as important what you leave out as what you put in. And then, of course, that theatrical quality is also enhanced. Some of the longer stories are divided into scenes, which makes them, again, sort of quite cinematic. I don't know if anyone else wants to move in, to jump in, but just one other thing is that she's very, very, she uses what we call a way of writing called free and direct discourse, where very often you are, as she's writing, you are hearing the voice of one or other of the characters. So you are within the essence of a character. And then she can go from one character to another. And again, it's a very immersive experience. It's very difficult to do, and she's an absolute master at it.
Fantastic. Any other comments? Sherry, Martin?
I just want to quickly share that I wrote a set of the 30 Cherita, which is like short poems of 6 lines. And for some of these, a lot of these will be published. They were inspired by At the Bay. And the first one, I will just quickly read out for you. It's At the Bay, drenched in sea mist, deep soaring silence. And there are some more later on.
That's probably the shortest poem I've ever heard, Sherry.
This is longer than a haiku, which
Oh,
I
okay.
write.
Yeah,
It's
just
just
jumping
lines.
in at the bay, you know, that idea of continuity, that the mist and the sea and the sky just connecting. For me, what's fascinating is she took those details and expanded them to the form. And talking about the fact that she published the story differently in America, she added a 13th chapter. And I think what was going on, and she was always fussy about her work. She was never happy, and she was trying to improve always. But she wanted the sense of cycle. She wanted to get back to the natural world again. And, you know, the ending of At the Bay is quite disturbing. In the final chapter, there's this assault, and that kind of, I don't know, for me, it's just struggling with, you know, what is the story about? And even though terrible things in life happen, there's still a cycle, and nature, that sounds corny, but, you know, the natural world brings us back to reality. And yeah, I just think that's amazing that she form an experimental way, which is completely new, you know, in terms of what was going on at the time.
Fantastic. So this will bring us then to our third roundtable. What is Catherine Mansfield's legacy? And so it's, Martin, maybe if you want to continue now. It's been 100 years since Catherine Mansfield passed. What is her legacy? And I'm kind of curious also, because again, when I think about that At the Bay, as you were saying, we start with this, you know, serene natural world. Then we go into this kind of a world where all of the characters in society are kind of not nice to each other. They're kind of mean to each other, or they even try to sexually assault one at the end. I mean, there's this strange game going on. How important is it that we read? How important is it that we say, oh, well, this is Catherine Mansfield, as opposed to, oh, well, this is a story Catherine Mansfield told?
Yeah, so to enjoy the work, you know, to read it, to experience it on different levels. You reread the stories, you go in deeper. And I think the legacy is, wow, just enjoy reading. Of course, other writers and artists are influenced by her, and that's a massive thing in New Zealand, particularly. We're very, in a sort of parochial way, very proud that we can associate with this genius writer. And so a lot of people are being influenced, and taking on board what she was doing and creating their own works. And I think that's something that is important to us and also hopefully to other people around the world. So that's from my perspective, that's an important part of her legacy.
Fantastic. And how about we go to Sherry, and then I'll give Gerri the last word.
Sure. So I'm creating this whole KM100NZ Festival for Catherine Mansfield, not only to celebrate her centenary, but also to celebrate New Zealand. So through music, arts, and poetry. I actually wrote recently a poetry book inspired by her, and I'm working on the second one as well.
Fantastic. Gerri, what's Catherine Mansfield's legacy?
Yeah, so she challenges her reader to look beyond face values, to confront superficiality, to despise cruelty. Like you were saying, Simeon, if we mustn't just take everything at face value, because there's always a message behind everything. She wants us to deny all those false values that you see in so many of her stories, and to sort of recreate the laws of life that are less bigoted and more spontaneous. And even during her, well, after her death, Virginia Woolf, who is recognised as one of the 20th century's greatest writers, less than a week after her death, she wrote in her diary, "I was jealous of her writing, the only writing I have ever been jealous of." And this made it harder to write her. And I saw in it, perhaps from jealousy, all the qualities I disliked in her. And she, for me, Mansfield remains the perfect example of how prodigious talent and seriousness of purpose can be couched in a very readable, accessible, and entertaining style. Because above all, Mansfield could be very witty and funny. So many of the stories, even some of the bleaker ones, like Life of Ma Parker, have witty episodes. And she knew that if she could make you laugh, then you were on her side, that it's a form of complicity, really. And I think that was a very, very clever move on her part. And I don't think that her talents as a story writer, there are lots of people who come quite close, but I don't think she's ever been surpassed for her technique and her ability to draw us in. She really was a genius at short story writing.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's see how we can stay in touch with the Catherine Mansfield Centenary. So this is going to be, we're going to be starting this festival soon. Is that right, Gerri? Sherry, excuse me?
Yes, it's going to be online, so a lot more people can participate. And I've actually invited also scholars from the D.H. Lawrence and Virginia Woolf societies to participate. So it's kind of a big reunion after 100 years. And also there'll be lots of concerts streamed, mostly the ones that I performed. I performed a tour in Asia of a concert called Catch 23, which was like 23 New Zealand composers' solo piano works. Some from Catherine Mansfield's time and some from modern times.
Fantastic.
And there's going to be a world premiere actually next week in Dunedin, and that's a project that I put together of 12 New Zealand composers' new songs written for mezzo-soprano and piano, and that's all setting Catherine Mansfield's poetry to music. That's very exciting. I'm really excited.
Fantastic. Okay, so I put that
new songs.
So I've put the website in Facebook and also here in on Zoom. So please reach out to share if you have any questions. Again, I believe it said it's going to be the 17th, the 19th. Is that right?
Of November, yes.
Fantastic.
It's going to be online 9 to 3 at New Zealand time, but then I will repeat 12 hours because I believe it's like a sleeping time from our European participants. So yeah, it will be mostly just streamed videos of the presenters and concerts, and the Bliss movie is going to be actually featured as well. That the entire movie will be played, and that documentary you just showed.
Wonderful. And people, they can register at this website?
They will be able to from about mid-October. I'm still putting together the program, and I'll open the registration in about a month.
Fantastic. And so they can reach out to you in any case.
In the
and then-
meantime, they can email me at km100nz@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Wonderful. So thank you so very much to Sherry Grant, to Dr. Gerri Kimber, and to Dr. Martin Griffiths.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's take a
Bye.
let's take a look at what's coming up next week on Vienna Live. It is Stephen Malilo. Can wind band music be art music? Symphony orchestras get most of the attention and funding in the classical music world. Wind bands, even those made up of orchestra musicians, don't seem to be considered as highly. Why is that? Is the sound of violins and cellos and the sweeping gestures their bows make an intrinsic feature of great classical music? The exorbitant price tags on violins, violas, and cellos, and mythical tales of genius told about Stradivarius and company seem to make public sentiment clear enough. After all, you'd be considered crazy to tell your girlfriend a romantic tale about Johann Christoph Denner and his clarinet, although he was Stradivarius' contemporary. Nevertheless, hiding in plain sight, the wind band has a large repertoire of great music waiting to be discovered. In this special edition of Vienna Live, composer Stephen Malilo and conductor Laszlo Marosi shares his compositional process and will show us that, given a chance, the wind band embodies classical music at its very best. Again, that's next Wednesday. Can wind band music be art music? All information about upcoming shows is available, as always, at www.simeonmoro.com. Once again, thank you so very much to Sherry Grant, to Dr. Gerri Kimber, and to Dr. Martin Griffiths. Thank you very much to Victoria and Frederick Mulligan and Agnieszka and Benoit Rivolet for their support of this show. Also, thank you to Mary Schlesinger for the lovely Viennese library you can see behind me. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From Auckland and Hamilton, New Zealand, Carcassonne, France, and New London, New Hampshire, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday.